I must admit that I come to this talk with some trepidation because most of my life I've kept quiet about my clairvoyant ability and the way that I see and perceive the world around me. I've come to my work as a healer, a teacher, and a land healer through a combination of my life experience and my deep connection to land. From an earliest age, the way that I perceived the world around me was literally seething in energy. Everything was vibrant, everything was moving, and I don't know if you can ever imagine walking on the ground when it's moving and shimmering, and it's like you're actually not walking on top of the ground, you're actually walking through it. So you can imagine that I had to be very thoughtful about how I was able to live in that environment and be able to discern actually what was an ordinary world and what was that extraordinary world. So my parents were non-religious, and my father was a chemist and my mother was an artist, and they considered that what was really important in the world was critical thinking, inquiry, curiosity. And this actually was really helpful for me because at one stage in my life, I remember seeing a man walk through the door, and he didn't need to actually open the door, he walked through it. And he came right up to me. He was wearing breeches, he was wearing stockings, they had odd diamonds on that stockings. And he put his hand on my leg, and I can tell you now, it was freezing cold, it was ice cold. So this was my experience, a very intimate experience with a ghost. And I remember at the time, I completely froze, like I could not move, I could not speak. And it was not a good feeling to have that sense of absolute helplessness in the face of this apparition. And yet at the same time, he was so vivid that he was very real. Eventually, I was yelling at him in my mind, and eventually he walked away, he got out. And I afterwards, and some time afterwards, it really opened me to really think about what were ghosts. How come they were there? How come that particular ghost came and visited me? And what I started to understand about ghosts, apart from some of the things you already know, but what I came to understand was that a ghost is also attracted to resonance. It was attracted to something about what was happening for me. And this is really the deep exploration of relationship, because we really need to understand how come something is happening to us and look at how we change ourselves in relationship to that. Obviously, I could have also been a beacon to that ghost as well. From all of my experiences in life, it's made me familiar with the energy behind the physical world. And I've, through my training, because I've had to train, I've actually had to just step up and go, hell, this is my life, and I've had to do it. I can tell you that I didn't need to take LSD as a teenager, that's for sure. And but how I've done it is I've had to see in my inner eye. I've had to train myself so that I'm not suddenly walking along and, oh my gosh, seeing things. And that's been fantastic because now I can access quite rapidly information and understanding from otherworldly processes, you could say, and integrate that in my life. The most important part of my life, the constant, is land. I grew up in Whakatane, and my early part of my life I spent near the Mokoroa Gorge, where there was a beautiful creek, and I had lots of neighbourhood kids and my older brothers and sisters, and it was a really good community. All of a sudden, at the age of 9, I shifted to Purapai. Purapai is ocean, wild, and suddenly I was alone. My brothers and sisters left home. My little community of people weren't there. And I got deeply connected to land. Now, we're talking about the 1970s. And I'm just telling you now that the raw sewage of Whakatane came out in a big pipe that was all rusting and went straight into that ocean. The board mills dumped all their wonderful poisons right on that land. But I tell you what, it was also huge, it was wild, it was a divine, beautiful place. My father was an environmentalist, and he fought very strongly to stop that sewage. He fought about the board mills dump, and I used to tag along with him to Whirinaki Forest whilst he measured the huge potocup trees that were felled there when they went over the limit. I wandered with him into the Uraweras, I wandered with him into the Motu, and I was very lucky in that sense that I had a strong connection to place. I would like to say that when I was 14, they decided to, I was going to say colonize, which is actually the right word. Developers came and they decided that this Purapai place was great and they were going to call it Coastlands. And all of a sudden, this amazing landscape was completely changed. And within about 4 years, there were fifth of an acre block sections, there were roads, there were the whole works. And it was a very powerful thing to witness colonization of land. When I say colonization of land, it's where someone has a great vision, they see it, and they do it. And they do not take the time to see how they could do it, maybe in a different way. They're not connecting. And in fact, the only way to really create some of these things that we do is to disconnect. If you think about here on Waiheke, how could you completely burn the whole of this island and create pasture unless you disconnected? You would have to disconnect. I don't know if you've seen photos of Waiheke many years ago. It's completely without a single tree. I mean, we have brought back so many trees and so much more bird life. 30 years ago when I arrived here, there was very little birds. There were hardly any birds, and I'm really excited because the birds are coming back, and that's a very positive and beautiful thing. When we create this colonization, our imprint, our minds, imprint and are exaggerated. Now, why is that? I know that I'm talking about perhaps an abstract subject for you, but as an example, I was called to clear a house of energy. And when I walked in, there was a particular part of that house where all the energy, it was like a sinkhole, it was like vroom, right in that one spot. And I sort of circled it. I didn't quite want to stand in it, but I went and stood on that spot, and it felt stagnant, it felt low, it felt depressed, it felt like helpless, and it was like, holy moly, just standing there was quite intense. So I started to get an image in my mind very clearly of a woman standing there doing the dishes. I thought, well, dishes are not that bad. I mean, okay, that's kind of intense for just constantly doing the dishes. Not only was I seeing that, but there was no kitchen here. So I went and talked to the owner. I said, was there a kitchen here? Was there a sink here? And she said, oh, yeah, there was. There was a sink here. And that was where it was, and it was exactly where I was standing. I was standing in front of that sink. Now, how come that imprint was still sitting there years after? It's not just the person feeling low. It is to do with how the house was built. Now, the house was built on top of a waterway. Guess what? Where it was stagnant, where it was blocked, was right there, where that person stood doing the dishes. What happens? It's about that relationship. We are not separate from that land. We are not separate. And so suddenly, there's a stagnant energy of water not being able to flow. And here's this woman depressed and sad. And here's where she does the dishes. And here's where her life's not so sweet. you know? And how do we clear that? It's really interesting because you've also got history and you've got essential essence of land. And it's that seeing of where that energy is in dissonance to the actual land. I want to talk about Blake here. I know it's like whoom over here, but I really love Blake, and he described and drew the ghost, what he called the ghost of a flea. And the ghost of the flea is the essential essence of the flea. And it's amazing. He describes it as this tongue flicking out of his mouth, the scales of gold and green, and he held a cup full of blood. And it was all, when you see this image, I mean, I'd love to show the image. It is a very potent image. And in that second, you know the essential essence of the flea. Okay. So we take that and we take that to land. And in Purapai, where I grew up, the essence of the land of Purapai is actually interesting because it is immensely wild. It's stark and it's harsh. As a child, I used to try and save the birds that were falling out of the nest, and I was never, ever good at that. And it had that harshness, but it also had the opposite, and it had soft hiding places. And so where I grew up and what that world of that sand dune was about was that dichotomy, that almost opposites. And those opposites are an essence of that land, and also as I'm in relationship to that land, it taught me a lot about the quality of opposites. So all of you know, all of you have a place that is your power place. All of you know something about the essential quality of where you might have grown up. When you go from essence and you understand the quality of land, you also have to start to look at how to be in land. And there's a protocol. The best way, I think, is to start simply by listening. And then you come to greeting. And that is a form of connection because you're acknowledging, you're receiving, you're greeting land. And then the next aspect of that is observation, of simply sitting, dropping into heart, extending your senses. These three aspects that I call the protocol of land are really utterly important. And very rarely do we do that. You think about it, you're walking along that track, you're thinking about this, you're thinking about that, you're thinking. These tracks delineate our landscape. And I love this one bird I love because it interrupts everybody's thinking and it doesn't get impacted by our thinking. And that's the fantail. Because you're walking along the fantail, flip, 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 and you go, huh, what was I thinking? Because it's completely interrupted your thinking process. And it's amazing. It's also chirping and it's saying, hello, hello, hello. And it's almost saying, connect, connect, connect. And you're going, what? I had a really good thought. So I've seen fantails do that to tracks. And it's fascinating because you see a track and you realise that there's a whole lot of people imprint on that track, usually destination. And the fantail can break it. So I'd like to come here now to acknowledgement of the land here, this land, and to take a moment to think about who has walked here before us and who has made their home here before us here. And how do you remember? Because we so easily forget. We're always forgetting what has been before us. I'd like to now acknowledge this forest that was here. I'd like to acknowledge the kokako that was in our forest here, and the huia. And I'd like to deeply give gratitude to the bellbird that was here, and the richness and abundance of all the streams and all the waterways on Waiheke Island that are no longer here. And by remembering them, we can honour them, give thanks to them, and really start to acknowledge our connection to place. For this is a beautiful, stunning island, and I love it here. I'd like to here and now finally bring us to connection. How do you connect? It's a question where you need to pause and come into heart. It's an open question. How do you connect? When you think about it, when you slowly allow yourself to connect, you pull away at barriers. You pull away at all the blocks, all the pain, and you finally touch that ground, that earth, that place. And it can feel vulnerable, really vulnerable. Because when we see, we are being seen. Thank you.